Hello everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. To ask any questions of today's presenters from Epilepsy Tasmania, please use the control panel to type and submit those questions throughout today's presentation. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is also being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenters from Epilepsy Tasmania, Wendy Groot and Amy Lewandowski. Wendy is the CEO of Epilepsy Tasmania. She has worked with community sector organisations for over 40 years. Amy is employed as a peer support coordinator with Epilepsy Tasmania. She has a lived experience living with epilepsy. She is also working with the National Peer Support Program, and we welcome both Wendy and Amy today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Stephanie.
And hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you. We had a presentation WorkSafe Month a couple of years ago, and it was received very well. So Epilepsy Tasmania it encourages workplaces, regardless of whether they have someone with epilepsy known to them in the workplace, to actually be epilepsy aware around what to do in relation to people with epilepsy that might come into their workplaces or maybe an employee. So today's about giving you a bit of a broad overview, and just to keep it well grounded, Amy has agreed to tell some of her story as part of this webinar and what Epilepsy Tasmania is doing in our space to try to be an epilepsy-friendly workplace. So Epilepsy Tasmania, so some people don't know that it's actually 1/5 of the population of Tasmania is either living with or affected by epilepsy. So it's 20,000 Tasmanians have developing and are developing epilepsy, but 80,000 family members, carers and friends are also affected, as some of you here today I'm sure are aware of that. So epilepsy is up to 8 times more common in people with other health conditions, such as depression, dementia, heart disease and arthritis, which further affects seizure outcomes and qualities of life. So every 33 minutes across Australia, somebody is diagnosed with epilepsy. Some of you might have seen a bus that's driving around in Hobart and Launceston. There's 2 metro buses that have on the driver's side a rather large pink panel with a mum and a daughter, and they talk about their life being turned upside down with their epilepsy. So keep an eye out for it if you haven't seen it. But Stephanie's now going to show you a short video around somebody's real life experience of living with epilepsy and what it's like for them.
How was your first day?
It was good. Everyone was having fun.
How was swimming?
It was good. I got splashed.
So, did you get the job?
They said they'd call me.
It's hard to flourish with a label over your head. No one with epilepsy should go it alone. Go to epilepsytasmania.org.au.
Trying to get the slides to work. It's not clicking through, Stephanie.
I'll move that forward, Wendy.
Thank you. Okay. So, as I said, there is every 33 minutes someone across the country is diagnosed with epilepsy. One of the things that we know, if you wanted to go to our website, there's an awful lot of information on there. We have some My Journey podcasts. There's a lot of podcasts on there. Some go for 10 minutes, some go for about 25. And they're people with epilepsy telling their stories. So they're very live, they're very rich. There's also some videos on there from our nurse educators, which you'll see today. as well as some of our other workers and some of the things that they do. So it's a rich abundance. One of the things that we found is that there's still so much stigma attached to epilepsy that we find it really hard for people to talk about it still. So Amy's one of the brave people that's prepared to be open about who she is, and having her working as a peer worker in the organisation has been invaluable over the last couple of years in helping to give people the confidence to talk about what their epilepsy is. So just a bit of an overview about who we are and what we do. So we're a statewide organisation. We are based in Launceston, in Willis Street, and we're in Hobart in the ABC building in what's called a Neuro Hub. And so we've been operating for about 48 years now across the state rather. And some of the things that we do as outlined on this side, some of the services. So predominantly what we do is have the people with epilepsy are at the centre of everything that we do. So they're the most important component, is that we focus as much of our service as possible on people living with epilepsy and their support people. And so that's where we generate most of our resources and most of our time. So we have a registered nurse employed, a social worker employed, education and training people employed, and peer support, and then admin and advocates, as well as volunteers across the organisation. So it's quite broad. We'd like to be bigger, but we're pretty proud of who we are at the moment. So we provide individual and family support, and there's no cost attached to this. So we receive some funding from the state government, and we rely on donations and income from some of the training provided to keep the rest of us going. So we're very grateful to the state government for the fact that they continue to fund us. We do a lot of education and training for epilepsy management, first aid awareness for schools, workplaces and families. So for example, in schools, 1 in 200 children would have epilepsy in the school place. So that's pretty well every school in Tasmania would have one, if not more, students with epilepsy, and that's not including the staff that might have epilepsy as well within the workplace. 70% of people with epilepsy are on medication that helps them. 30% of people can't have any medication that helps them, so that means their seizures are uncontrolled, which makes it very difficult for the 30% of people in Tasmania. Things like driving a car becomes a very, very difficult task. So we provide education and administration for those people who are fortunate enough to be helped with emergency medication. We provide a lot of information and resources. Amy will talk a little bit more a bit later about the peer support program that she's part of. And we provide a lot of community support and try to integrate services together. So we work very, very hard to try to break a silo model of how people receive care. And we work very, very hard on trying to make sure that people only have to tell their story once, that they don't get run around the health system. So we have people ringing us and we try to support people so that they don't have to turn up to the emergency departments. There's a lot of advice that we can offer people that means that they don't need to go to the emergency departments for hours. We can actually say, no, you need to go back to your GP on that one. Don't go and sit in the emergency department. So there's lots of things like that that we do. Can you do the next slide, Stephanie? For some reason it won't work for me. Back one.
Oh, back one, sorry. Apologies.
So there's a lot of things that happen with the impact on epilepsy. Most of you would be familiar with the iceberg model, that only about 10% of what's going on you can actually see. The rest of it's under the water as an iceberg and hidden. So we do lots of surveys to get feedback from people about what's their experience within the Tasmanian community, and lots of people still keep telling us that they still feel discriminated against. Lots of people still tell us that they know that they haven't been successful in a job because they've disclosed that they've had epilepsy, and they can tell by the reaction of the people that are interviewing them that that's the reason why they didn't get the job. So being really aware of and not, I think what you say to a lot of people, particularly into workplaces, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's really important to get an understanding what epilepsy is and what you can do to actually help support somebody. And that way you significantly open up the opportunities for people. So most people who are aware of epilepsy have experienced seeing somebody with a seizure, and that's how they describe epilepsy. And that can be many, many different types of seizures, but most people associate the seizures to the one where somebody falls to the floor. But there's lots of other types of seizures. Somebody gazing out of a window can actually be a seizure. They look like they're just not present at that moment in time. But behind the scenes, a whole lot of other things that happen to people. So memory becomes a very big issue for people, that they can have trouble trying to remember things. Some people can actually, following a seizure, can actually ask the same question 2 or 3 times because they're just not retaining that information when they're asking a question. As I said previously, there's a lot of stigma attached. With epilepsy, people can get very, very tired and very fatigued. We've had one workplace a few years ago that had somebody with epilepsy that what they needed following their seizure was to just go and have a sleep. And this workplace was fabulous, and they actually repurposed one of their offices, and they put a bed in there and the right sort of lighting and other seizure prevention, injury things in that room, and that person could go and have a sleep. And that was incredibly supportive for them and for that workplace. Self-esteem can be a big issue because we all get self-conscious about all sorts of things. But if something is like epilepsy, because it can be quite a visual experience for people, it can actually affect how people feel about themselves. As I said, the side effects from medication can be significant, which is why it's really important that anybody who has epilepsy, they need to have an epilepsy management plan, because everybody's experience of epilepsy and their medication, nobody's the same. So it's really important to understand people's individualised experience of what epilepsy does to them and what the impact of their medication. And anxiety and depression are also something that can happen with people as well. As you can appreciate, if 30% of people walking around with epilepsy don't know when they're next having a seizure, then obviously their anxiety is going to be heightened because they don't know whether going to the supermarket is going to be okay or not. So that's just a few of the impacts that have on people with epilepsy, but Amy will talk a little bit more about it from her experience in a minute. So we'll move on to the next one. Thank you. So what's a seizure? So the seizure is a physical sign that there's been a disruption to the normal functioning of the brain. So it's a bit like an electric charge goes off, and sometimes in your car, it's a bit like your spark plug might sort of rev a little bit and your car sort of jolts and does something different. It just slips off its axis a bit. So that's a little bit like what it's like for somebody with a seizure. It's their normal functioning of their brain is disrupted by the fact that there's been this electronic charge in their brain. And epilepsy diagnosis occurs when a person starts experiencing seizures on a regular basis. It's one of the scary things for people is getting a diagnosis, because usually the diagnosis is you need to have two seizures in a particular space of time, period of months, before the doctor diagnoses. You might have one seizure and you can't get a diagnosis, so you don't actually know whether you have epilepsy or not. But there's certainly a lot of research that's being done that's actually increasing the early diagnosis of epilepsy than certainly when I first started 8 years ago. There's been quite an increase of research in that space. Next one, please. So then, as I spoke before, people have an epilepsy management plan. So it's basically a written document that just says, go through these particular issues that are on this screen. So first of all, the first thing you do when you do an epilepsy management plan is write down what is the person's epilepsy. So what is the diagnosis? Do they have emergency medication? What do they have? How often do they have it? What's the triggers for it? If they have emergency medication, then they need to have an emergency medication management plan as well as the epilepsy management plan, because you need to be, people need to be trained to be able to administer that emergency medication, because clearly the person who's having a seizure is not able to administer their emergency medication while they're having a seizure for all sorts of reasons. There's different things that trigger people. So some things that trigger people might be just recurring flashing lights. Computer screens can actually be a trigger. Some people, it can be noise. It can be a whole lot of different things that trigger off what your seizure is. It can be anxiety. It can be too much activity going on around them. So a variety of too much noise. So as again, each person has different triggers, and it's really important to be able to identify what those are and have them written down so that as a workplace, you could potentially try to avoid some of those triggers. Some people have pre-seizure signs, so some people get a bit of an aura across them, and they know that there's a seizure coming. So, and people can tell you those things, and when they can tell you those things, then you know that what you need to do is go and take them to a quiet space, sit with them, and just stay with them while that process is happening. There's a description of what a seizure is and what it looks like. Again, most people are different, so it's really important to understand exactly what is the seizure going to do. Emergency response. So when do you need to call an ambulance? Most rule of thumb is if you don't know the person and you don't know their epilepsy, you automatically call an ambulance. If some people say after 3 minutes, if the seizure hasn't ceased, you call an ambulance. But again, individualised. People will tell you what they need and what you need to do. What sort of support you have during a seizure, we'll talk about that in a minute when we go across to another slide. And then what do people need post-seizures? And as I said before, remember the story I said before about the person who needs to go and have a sleep post-seizure. So there's different things that people need. Some people just need some quiet. Some people just need it's all different sorts of things depending upon your individualised circumstances. And then you, as a workplace, it's really important that you're aware of what are the risk and the safety issues. And again, Amy's going to pick up on that from our perspective in a little bit. So that's sort of what a management plan is, and they're very, very important. Next one, please. You click it again. And again, one more. There we go. So you can't read this, I know, but this just gives you, this is what an emergency management plan looks like. We provide that information for people. We can sit and do that with people. Sometimes we also need doctors to sign off on it as well. But we do a lot of work sitting with people running their epilepsy management plan. That can take an hour, it can take 3 hours, depending upon the complexity of what it is. And some of the questions that we ask are, how often do you have a seizure? Do you get warning? Some of the things I just talked about. What sort of seizures? Do you lose consciousness? Some people do lose consciousness, and that's really important then that you call an ambulance when that happens. So this is just a graphic just to show you what it looks like, but I know that you won't be able to read the detail, but just to give you an idea that if we were to come to your workplace and sit with somebody who had epilepsy, some people with epilepsy will have an emergency epilepsy management plan, but it's only HR that know about it. It's not something that they want the entire workplace to know, and that's very important that we protect people's privacy around some of those issues. So it's really up to the individual. We certainly don't outline who has come to us in terms of their workplace with epilepsy. Again, it's a very private thing, and as we all know, all of our own medical issues are really at our discretion about what we want to disclose and not disclose. For example, I know that there's some people here today that are in the fishing industry. So something like an epilepsy management plan, if you've got somebody on a boat, is going to be very, very different than if you've got somebody who's in a construction workplace, for example, or a public service or a health condition. So it's very, very important that you start to think about what is my workplace and what are the risks, because obviously the risks of being on a fishing boat are quite significantly different than others, but they all can be mitigated if we're aware of them. So next one, please. So this is just generalised. So the one sort of seizures that people are aware about, which I spoke about before, is the one where you see somebody falling to the floor, and that's what's called a tonic-clonic seizure. So the important steps to do, this information is available on our website. You can download a seizure first aid poster on your website, which we encourage everybody to do regardless of whether they have someone with epilepsy or not. We certainly come into the workplace and train around this, so I don't expect that you may get frustrated and go, how am I going to remember this? Well, you don't need to, but you can seek us for support later or download the website. From the website, we do have a lot of people that are downloading the first aid seizures. The most downloaded thing, and the next one is epilepsy and driving, and the most two most prioritised forms that get downloaded for our website. So just generally, one of the things you do is you see what time the seizure started. Usually there's put something under their head so that they don't sort of bang their head on the ground, so that could just be your jumper. Just remove things from around them. You'd never ever restrain someone when they're having a seizure, and you never ever put anything in their mouth. That's a very, very old myth. You can actually hurt yourself, and you can potentially hurt the person. If you put something in their mouth, for example, you can actually shatter all their teeth. So it's really important that you don't do that. You just let the seizure play out as it does. You put the person into the recovery position when you can. And one of the things that's not generally aware is that when somebody's having a seizure, they can often hear you when you're talking to them. And there has been research to show that people can actually come out of a seizure sooner if somebody is quietly and calmly calling them by their name, telling them that they're having a seizure. You'll be okay. My name's Wendy. I'm here supporting you, and we'll just stay here for as long as we need. And doing that's really, really important because people can still hear you. And then you stay with them until they're recovered. And then once they've recovered from the seizure, then the next response is, what do you need from me now? Is the next response. And they will let you know what that is. So that's a general overview about what happens if somebody's having a seizure, but we'll certainly spend a lot of time going through that in detail. Next one, please. So this is when somebody is not aware of what's going on. Again, the same things, time the seizure, don't restrain the person. If somebody's up, they're walking. So some people, when they're having impaired awareness, they can actually be walking around but not be aware of what they're doing. So that's why it's really important that you're actually walking with them and you guide them. So this picture of this little boy, for example, he's impaired awareness, so he's having a seizure, but he looks like he's still 100% present, but he's not. Again, talk to the person, make sure they have regained full awareness, stay with them and reassure them until they've recovered. Really important that you move objects out of the way that they might bump into, but very, very important that you don't restrain them, but you just guide them. You might need two people to do that. And then gently, when they're coming out of that, just say, okay, let's sit down now, we'll sit on the couch or lie on the floor, whatever they're most comfortable doing, and just keep talking to them about what's been going on. So similar process, people are aware, they can hear you, but you just need to keep them safe in whichever way that's needed at that point in time. So, next one, please. So now I'm going to show a video. This is one of our trainers, Emma. She's the nurse, and she's talking a little bit about epilepsy and what it is that she does.
Hello, Epilepsy Tasmania, Emma speaking. Registered paediatric nurse, so I've got over 20 years experience looking after kids in my nursing career. I've been with Epilepsy Tasmania for the last 18 months. I'm an education and training coordinator for the north of the state. So we offer a range of training depending on what people's experiences are with epilepsy. The most common training is a basic understanding and management of epilepsy and seizures, which explains what epilepsy is, what seizures are, some seizure first aid, and also how to care for individuals with epilepsy and how they're impacted and how their life's impacted when they're not having seizures, because that's really quite significant for people living with epilepsy. We also provide specific training for people looking after people with epilepsy around their specific individual epilepsy management plan, so how they specifically want to be looked after. And then as the nurse for Epilepsy Tasmania, my role is also to provide training around emergency medications and administering emergency medications when people are having seizures to help stop that seizure or reduce the length of the time that seizure goes for. So that's training people that are unfamiliar with giving medications to people and to make them feel confident in giving that medication safely. Our is for some understanding for people living with epilepsy, what epilepsy and seizures mean for them, for the family and carers of them people, but also for the greater community supporting them people living with epilepsy. So workplaces and schools, care organisations, anyone really that is impacted by someone that has epilepsy or is experiencing seizures. We do a lot of education with people with epilepsy, because a lot of the times they get an epilepsy diagnosis and they don't actually understand much about that, or they might have had that diagnosis for a really long time, and sometimes the terminology and knowledge and things around epilepsy has changed significantly since the information that they were first provided with. They might have been diagnosed as a child and so didn't actually get any education or information, just had their diagnosis, and now that they're an adult they want to know a little bit more and understand what epilepsy means a little bit more. So it is with the individual, but it's a lot more with the support workers and the carers and the people that are involved with those people. We are really flexible with our training options, so we can provide face-to-face training. We like to get out as much as we can. You get a lot more out of that face-to-face training where you can sit with people and have that conversation, and it sort of generates a little bit of open discussion. So we do encourage face-to-face training where we can. We're doing a lot of training via Zoom or any sort of video link. We can also offer online training for people that have need to do it in their own time. So yeah, we can be really flexible with our training options. Well, again, we've got really flexible accessibility, so people can walk in our door, they can ring us up, they can email us, they can jump on the website, they can jump on our Facebook page, and all of them places will come to us and we will respond within hopefully 24, 48 hours. Absolutely. So it's a really fantastic job because you get to such diversity in what you do. We cover a really broad spectrum of people from all walks of life. So it's never boring. Every day is different. You get to get out and about. You get to go into school environments and workplaces and places that you probably wouldn't access otherwise. And you get to make a significant impact in people's lives and make a real positive change and just support them to live a better life. So I remember one of my first clients was a 17-year-old girl that was really struggling with a recent diagnosis, and it had just completely changed her life. So she'd gone from, starting uni, getting a license, becoming independent, to having an epilepsy diagnosis and losing her license, not being able to go to uni at that stage because her seizures were too complicated, and also their social impacts. So she was struggling with the friendship groups and going out and drinking and partying as goes along with being that age and not being able to do any of that. And then also her wanting to get a bit of independence, and so her mum became really wrap her into cotton wool, and she was feeling that she didn't have any independence and she'd lost everything. And so I met with her and her mum to start with, and then she actually started engaging with me outside of visits with her mum, and we talked about some of the issues that she was having that she didn't want to discuss with her mum around alcohol and party drugs and things like that. And so I actually supported her and started going to the neurology appointments with her so that she could ask the doctor them questions that she couldn't ask when mum was in them appointments. And then I was also able to support mum in knowing that someone was with her child, and she was very grateful from that side of things, knowing that while her child was pushing her away at that time, there was someone there that was supporting her, so that she wasn't alone at that time. And and she's back, she's well controlled on medication now, she's back at uni, she's driving, she's working again, and she's really sort of thrived even after a diagnosis at that age.
Just wait for a moment, Stephanie, to get me back up again. So as you can see, Emma was very passionate about her work within the organisation. So now I'm going to hand over to Amy. So Amy, we used this title about a year or so when we talked about what it's like for somebody to suddenly be diagnosed with epilepsy, and basically their life is completely interrupted, sometimes without any warning. So Amy, I'm going to hand over to Amy now, and then we've got time once Amy's finished, we'll see if there's any questions from people. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Hi, everyone. I hope you are all well. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on me, and then we can look at the balanced approach that we assist clients in hopefully looking at and developing, and then also going ahead and looking at it from the workplace perspective. So prior to July 2021, I worked in a number of management roles at the University of Tasmania for 24 years and then took a redundancy. In late August 2021, Epilepsy Tasmania employed me. I'd been doing a couple of years of volunteer work with them, so they knew me. And they employed me as the peer support and volunteer project coordinator at that stage. That was my title. I am the organisation's only staff member with epilepsy. Epilepsy started for me almost 20 years ago. I was due to have a colonoscopy, and the oral preparation caused my first tonic-clonic seizure. I then continued to have more of these. They were always nocturnal, and they are still always nocturnal. In the first year, I was very much in denial, which is something that is very, very common, especially with epilepsy. I didn't want to accept that I had epilepsy. Based on a week of monitoring at the Royal Melbourne, it was found that I also have complex partial or focal seizures. They're now called focal seizures, and these two are nocturnal. They're the ones that Wendy was referring to around people walking around, and I don't have awareness when I'm doing that. Very much my husband goes into the role of caring for me. In an effort to be seizure-free, I had a lesionectomy at Melbourne Private Hospital 9 years ago. And in the first year after this surgery, I took a smaller quantity of anticonvulsants, and I wasn't aware of having any seizures. So you can imagine I was very, very excited and pleased, thinking that it was a success and I was seizure-free. I was so excited. I thought I was in the category of 70% who are seizure-free after that surgery. However, the very first night after following the neurologist's instructions and slowly weaning myself off the anticonvulsants, I had a tonic-clonic seizure. And then I knew that I would need to come to terms with living with uncontrolled epilepsy. That is that you still take your anticonvulsants, but you still have seizures. Since then, on average, I have about 4 or 5 tonic-clonic seizures a year and an unknown amount of complex partial or focal seizures. I acknowledge that I am really very lucky because all of my seizures are nocturnal. And that means that then, yes, they do interrupt my life, but sort of only from that perspective, but then the effect of them does creep back into my daily life. And that means that they do still cause an interruption to my life. They throw me into fear, not knowing who I am, where I am when I first come out of them. And as Wendy said, I truly believe that I do hear, when I'm first coming out, I hear a voice. And if that voice is calm and caring and reassuring, then I think it's a lot easier for me to come out as quickly as possible and recover from the seizure. It also means, though, that when I first come out of them, it can mean that it follows, what follows is a week of anxiety and a very vague and fuzzy mind. I always seem to also have panic attacks afterwards. This isn't the case for everyone. We all do have very different effects from seizures. There are some similarities, but there are also differences according to the individual. This and the other impacts of the seizure can cause a big dent in my self-confidence for a while afterwards. And that means I must work very, very hard to pull myself out of that. Epilepsy may bring on a world of fear, the unknown, very much a sense of closeness to death, anxiety, and then going to bed with the thought, will I have a seizure tonight? We work with clients on having a balanced approach as much as they can, aiming to have a healthy diet, regular exercise, avoiding and managing stress, because stress is really a very big trigger, getting enough sleep, another very big trigger, and staying hydrated too, which is a very big trigger and something that in a lot of different workplaces is really important. Also something that we talk with teachers and teacher assistants about for students at school, making sure that they keep well hydrated. Another aspect of the balanced approach that I continue to work on is being determined not to let epilepsy affect the quality of my life or the ability to undertake any position in my work life. As such, I do always aim to be at work no matter what has happened the night before. However, seizures are very challenging in many respects, and occasionally I may need to take some sick leave so my body and my mind can recover. I am lucky. I have a very solid working relationship with my direct report, Wendy, so if I have had a seizure the night before, I will contact her and let her know. And she's very, very, very supportive and understanding if I am not able then to show up in the workplace, especially if I have a tonic-clonic, because a tonic-clonic is the effect on the body is the same as if that body has run a marathon. So then I really need to recover by going to sleep. I think also too though, with epilepsy, it does actually drive people to do the very best they can in the workplace to not let it affect them and to be as diligent as possible. If you are an employer and you do have any direct reports with epilepsy, I strongly encourage you to please work with them to ensure you have an understanding of their seizures, the type or types that they have, if they're day or nighttime seizures or both, the duration and the frequency, also the fact that as people get older, seizures can change, and that can be a good thing as well. Also how they would like to be cared for and supported during and after a seizure. If they have an epilepsy management plan, all of this can be found in that document. and that can be a good basis for that conversation. As Wendy mentioned, Epilepsy Tasmania does also offer training for workplaces. So the employers who work with the staff member with epilepsy are also provided with this understanding and taken through the seizure first aid steps, so they know how to manage a seizure if this occurs. Workplaces can be made seizure friendly in many ways by looking at a lot of aspects in that context. So looking at the stairs, looking at the furniture, looking at the equipment, also the regular footpath of that employee, and everything then that person in that workplace may come into contact with. In the Epilepsy Tasmania offices, we have done a lot of work in this area. We have ensured that we've got corner protectors, and these have been applied to all the sharp edges of furniture in case someone has a seizure and falls against them, as well as removing rugs that could be trip hazards, and having a handrail attached near stairs to assist in the use of them. Epilepsy does mean for some people that they don't have a good sense of balance. We also have seizure first aid posters and safety in the home posters on walls in many different office rooms. And we've talked through seizure response plans amongst ourselves so that we're fully ready if a client or staff member does have a seizure. As Wendy mentioned, my key role with Epilepsy Tasmania and now in a national project is peer support, and that was establishing peer support for Epilepsy Tasmania. This is offering people with epilepsy and their carers a closed group, so confidential, very much private, in a safe space to make contact with others who might be in a similar position or experiencing similar things to them due to their medical condition. This provides them with a chance to talk about living with epilepsy, share stories, challenges, fears, questions and concerns, provide lifestyle tips, shared understanding, support, encouragement and compassion. We are really strongly hoping this will help them to feel like they have a voice about life with epilepsy, reduce any feelings of isolation, normalise epilepsy and increase their feelings of acceptance and connection. Thank you very much, and please feel free to go ahead now and ask us any questions you like.
So thank you to Epilepsy Tasmania for their presentation today. So if anyone does have any questions for our presenters, Wendy Groot and Amy Lewandowski from Epilepsy Tasmania, please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit any questions. So just a general comment, Wendy and Amy, you provided some, I guess, interesting statistics at the start of the webinar around the number of Tasmanians with epilepsy, but also around discrimination in the workplace. What reasons are there for that, I guess, continued discrimination in the workplace?
I'll go first, if you like, Amy, then you can. I think it's the discrimination in the workplace is lack of understanding predominantly. If people don't understand what epilepsy is, we're all familiar with the term unconscious bias, and that really is, if you don't know enough about something, then you actually don't know that you are actually being biased towards a person. So it's about raising your awareness. Fear is a big driver with people with around epilepsy, because there are, I mean, in some countries of the world, it's just amazing how people with epilepsy are treated in some of the other countries in the world. We're very fortunate in Australia in that sense, but it's really a lack of a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, and not knowing what to do. So again, people generally are kind, but if you don't understand something, then you might unconsciously respond in a way that's not helpful. Amy?
Yes, also too, I think it can be very challenging from an employer's perspective if the employee is doing a specific role, and that means that they're using specific equipment, and then that person gets diagnosed with epilepsy, and how to manage that as well. We've assisted a few employers with that, so that they can then go ahead and openly talk with their employee and work on looking at different options in that workplace for them.
Thank you. One of the videos showed a nasal spray, and I'm possibly going to mispronounce this one, midazolam. Is it available here in Tasmania?
Nadaz, we call it shorthand, and that's the medication that can either be usually a nasal spray, but it can actually be put in your mouth as well. That's predominantly the medication that is scripted for people with epilepsy in Tasmania, and certainly when we go to schools, for example, we work with the staff, because it's actually a very significant medication. It's very, very important that it's administered properly. So we go through a very extensive training with people who have to do that. And some places just say, no, we'll just call the ambulance straight away because we're not comfortable. So it's whatever people are. Some people say, well, we'll call mum because she's just around the corner and she can come and do that. But yes, it's readily available, and it's the most common one that's being used and the safest one in terms of being able to monitor and measure the right diagnosis for it.
Thank you, Wendy. You talked about training, and obviously you have different ways people can access the training. Is there a cost involved?
Yes, so it's training that can be done online, but we encourage the face-to-face. So it's pretty much dependent upon what training you're looking for, what the package is, how many people there are. So we have a staff person called Liz who coordinates all the training, and we obviously require people before the training. But for example, schools do have a health budget, so they can actually know how many children they have with epilepsy and be putting into the education department for their health budget for them to do that training. Same way as they will with somebody with asthma. People with on the NDIA packages now can access some epilepsy services which they couldn't previously, which is really good. So, for example, equipment. So people can get a seizure first aid bed alert mattress. So if they're having a seizure in the night time, that can alert somebody, so somebody can come and assist that person of the night time. So there's a number, and there's watches people can wear. So there's all sorts of equipment now that people can have as well that alerts somebody else that you've got, you're having a seizure and come and help them, which includes first responders.
Thank you, Wendy. And there's still time to ask questions of our presenters today from Epilepsy Tasmania, Wendy Groot and Amy Lewandowski. If you have any questions, please use the control panel to type and submit those questions. And today's webinar is part of WorkSafe Tasmania month, which runs throughout the month of October. The webinar is also being recorded and will be made available at the end of October. With no questions coming through at the moment, Wendy and Amy, are there any sort of key messages that you'd like to leave the audience?
I think one of my things that I'd like to talk about is that we had somebody who just wanted to know about epilepsy and what to do with an epilepsy seizure. So they put themselves through the training as an individual, and they're in the supermarket one day, and a man with two young boys had a seizure in front of him. and he was there with his wife, and he knew what to do. This was the first seizure this man had had in public. The boys didn't know what was going on, so the wife went in to assist with the two boys. And the man in public saw the man's name on his credit card that he was paying for his groceries for, and sat there and talked him through. So for me, it's part of our role really is to be, same as many of us have basic first aid. So because in that moment, that was a significant moment for that family, and having someone there knowing what to do to support them was actually incredibly important and very, very valuable for that family at that time. So even if you don't think you know anybody, you could be standing in a supermarket and there'll be somebody in front of you. So having the training and being aware of basic first aid is actually really, really important if people, would like to take that on as an opportunity. It's one of my key messages that I talk about.
Thank you. So in a high-risk environment, Wendy and Amy, like a deckhand on vessels operating forklifts, etc., where do you think the best place is to go to understand how, I guess, that workplace or that individual, sort of can be safe in the workplace when someone does get diagnosed with epilepsy? Should they be going to their GP, for example, for clearance, to be able to operate high-risk tasks?
Do you want to go, Amy?
Yeah, I would say talk to the GP in Tasmania. It's very, very important for someone who has epilepsy to have a good relationship with the GP, given how hard it is for us to get appointments with neurologists. But I'd also say that that's something we also do. Along with the training, we go into workplaces and we assist by helping them to have a good look at it and talk about the various different tasks required and really what's safe and what is not safe as well. We're more than happy to talk about all of that as part of the training.
So one example of it too, Stephanie, is, for example, if I walk into a workplace, I'm always navigating the workplace, and one of the simple things is which way do your doors open and close, and your toilets? Because if your toilet's doors open inward, you can't act, and somebody has a seizure in the toilet and they fall up against the door, you can't help them. So there's simple things like that. So it's a bit like childproofing your home in many ways, but you put the epilepsy lens on. So there's lots of things like that can be very simple. And as Amy said before, just putting soft edges on your sharp corners of your desks and benches and things like that. It's very, very simple. It's not extraordinarily expensive to do. There's just being aware and just having, your HR person have a look around, or whoever it is in your workplace, just have a look at what are some of the things that you can do. Certainly in things like a fishing boat, I'm sure that there'll be ways to mitigate that, but that would, again, we don't like to give generalised, except toilets really, but you really need to just have a look at the specific workplace and what it is that people are required to do and how we might be able to assist with that.
Thank you, Wendy. And if people want to get more information about epilepsy or training, best place to go directly to the website?
Next slide, Stephanie.
Oh, the next slide is the end slide. So my apologies for that one.
I thought we had one there about how to get in touch with us.
Well, we can.
Yes.
I can certainly send those details out to to participants. So the epilepsy website.
Yeah, Epilepsy Tasmania. Just Google us. We're on Facebook and we're on the website. There's a lot of information on the website, and it's encouraging people to listen to the podcasts as well and listen to people's stories. They're very, very powerful.
Thank you, Wendy. And on that note, we certainly thank our presenters today from Epilepsy Tasmania, Wendy Groot and Amy Lewandowski, who also provided us with her personal story. So thank you to everyone for attending attending today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar, Epilepsy Services, Supports and How to Have a Healthy and Safe Workplace. WorkSafe Tasmania Month again runs throughout the month of October and is sponsored by the WorkCover Tasmania Board. So again, thank you to our presenters and thank you for everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.